Max Verstappen finished third in Montreal, yet his post-race words carried more weight than the podium. The four-time champion revealed he pushed back on a setup, tried it anyway, and received no engineering feedback. That silence from the garage points to something deeper than one weekend. Because when the driver who defines Red Bull's success says his concerns are not heard, their championship foundation begins to shake. Verstappen is the reference point for Red Bull's technical philosophy. The RB22 appears trapped in a loop where every gain creates a new compromise. But the real mystery is not the aero map. It is why the driver who feels imbalances first says his warnings are ignored. The data tells a completely different story than the podium photo suggests. When a champion stops trusting the process, the fight shifts from track to garage. What no broadcast covered is this: the numbers reveal only half the story. The real question is whether Red Bull can fix the conversation that builds the car. And that answer begins with the championship math that changes everything. Verstappen sits 103 points behind the championship leader after Canada. This gap demands perfection from Red Bull while hoping for chaos elsewhere. The math is brutal, but the psychology matters more. When a four-time champion knows he needs rivals to fail just to stay alive, pressure shifts from speed to something fragile. Red Bull trails Mercedes by 87 points in the constructors' fight. In Sector 2 at Montreal, the RB22 lost 0.4 seconds to McLaren through high-speed traction zones. Tire degradation ran 18% higher than Mercedes on identical compounds. What the timing sheets did not show is that Red Bull's race pace simulation had Verstappen capped at P5 maximum. The podium was damage limitation, not dominance. Extracting miracles from flawed machinery works only so long. The real question is whether Red Bull can give Verstappen a car that creates opportunities instead of waiting for others to collapse. That question leads directly to the feedback loop that broke in Montreal. The driver-engineer feedback loop is Formula One's heartbeat. When Verstappen says he asked for answers and got silence, that heartbeat skipped. His pedal slip issue was not minor comfort. At 200 miles per hour, brake modulation decides corner entry. A foot shift of 2 millimeters can cost 0.3 seconds per lap. But here is what the paddock is not talking about. The RB22 shows 12% higher yaw sensitivity versus the RB19 per early telemetry. Mark Hughes noted that when a driver of Max's caliber reports being ignored, it signals dangerous data confusion or hesitation. Engineers reran CFD correlations post-session. They were not dismissing Verstappen. They could not yet prove why his feeling mismatched their numbers. And that is where this story gets complicated. This is not about one setup experiment. It is about restoring the rapid conversation that turns sensation into speed. The vicious circle means stiffening the rear worsens exit grip, amplified by the RB22's narrow window. For technical fans, this is data versus feeling, and why both must align. But history shows this tension is not new, and past patterns hold a warning Red Bull cannot ignore. When Verstappen questions Red Bull's direction, he stands at a familiar crossroads. Senna clashed with Williams in 1994. Hamilton voiced frustration with Mercedes in 2022. Prost and McLaren diverged in 1989. Each moment carried a warning. Driver intuition can outpace data, and when the two stop speaking the same language, the championship pays. But history also shows tension can become fuel. Hamilton's 2022 critiques were followed by private alignment, restoring trust within 5 races. Prost and McLaren won the title, but the partnership never recovered. Jos Verstappen emphasizes the car must speak the driver's language, a principle carrying extra weight under the cost cap. Setup errors today carry heavier penalties because testing time is limited. What no broadcast covered is this: each historical clash resolution shaped the title outcome within a handful of races. This is the part that changes everything. Red Bull manages a legacy partnership under unprecedented constraints. If Verstappen's feedback loop is restored by Silverstone, the RB22 could find consistency. If not, every upgrade becomes a trust test. But history shows one path where tension became fuel. What if Red Bull is evolving, not breaking? The answer begins inside the garage. Christian Horner said Red Bull always listens to Max. That statement carries new weight understanding Montreal's behind closed doors reality. What no broadcast covered is this: post-race, engineering held a 3-hour debrief focused on restoring feedback cadence. This was not damage control. It was recognition that trust is a performance metric needing urgent attention. Under 2026 testing restrictions, Red Bull has 15% fewer wind tunnel runs versus 2023. That constraint forces harder choices on which theories to validate first. The RB22's narrow temperature window means Friday directions can fail by Sunday. Every session revalidating basics is a session not developing upgrades. For Red Bull loyalists, this is not dysfunction. It is rebuilding a dynasty under new constraints. And that is where this story gets complicated. While Red Bull looks inward, rivals are not waiting. Mercedes, McLaren, and Ferrari are watching, learning, adapting. They know a team questioning its direction is vulnerable to pressure. The data tells a completely different story than the podium suggests. Because while Red Bull debates internally, competitors exploit one specific weakness Max revealed in Canada. Mercedes, McLaren, and Ferrari are using Red Bull's tension. Toto Wolff noted Verstappen extracts performance beyond the RB22's envelope, a cue for Mercedes to prioritize reliability. McLaren monitored Red Bull's garage communications in Montreal, a legal but telling sign of psychological intelligence. When a champion questions his car, rivals target his struggling corners in their development. McLaren's Canada success came from preserving rear tires, countering the RB22's high degradation weakness. Ferrari's SF24 gained 0.2 seconds in Sector 3 by optimizing its rear suspension kinematics, a solution Red Bull still explores. Gary Anderson observed that when a champion's confidence wavers, competitors accelerate upgrades, exploiting those doubts. What the data shows is every session Red Bull spends rebuilding trust is a session rivals use to build momentum. This is the part that changes everything. If Red Bull needs July races to repair their feedback loop, Mercedes and McLaren can compound upgrade advantages, widening the championship gap. The real story was never about Canada's lap time. It was about the strategic window opening when a dominant team questioned itself. And that window leads directly to the trust restoration framework that could save or seal Red Bull's season. Red Bull faces a choice mattering more than any upgrade. Rebuild the conversation with Verstappen or watch championship hopes fade. The trust protocol starts with immediate post-session sync, transparent data sharing, and joint decision gates before experiments. Mercedes used a similar framework in 2023, restoring Hamilton's confidence. But here is what the paddock is not talking about. Implementing a driver confidence metric alongside lap time could unlock the 0.3 seconds per lap. Red Bull needs closing the McLaren gap by Silverstone. Jos Verstappen has served as Max's feeling translator, and formally integrating that role could bridge data and sensation. What no broadcast covered is this. Red Bull's technical director scheduled a driver-first setup workshop for Austria, a direct Montreal response. And that is where this story gets complicated. This is the part that changes everything. Verstappen's biggest battle is ensuring his voice shapes the car carrying his name. For Verstappen loyalists, this is not about blame. It is empowering the driver who carried this team to give his best. The real question is whether Red Bull can execute this framework before championship math becomes impossible. Because that answer leads directly to the consequence defining their season. Monaco will test Red Bull uniquely. The street layout demands 95% mechanical grip versus usual 60% aero dependency, forcing a setup philosophy potentially splitting the garage. With 8 races remaining after Monaco, every misalignment session costs approximately 5 championship points, a deficit compounding faster than upgrades recover. This is not just fixing a car, it is protecting the synergy that built a dynasty. The legacy stakes extend beyond 2026. What no broadcast covered is this. The space between driver's hands and engineer's ear is where championships are truly built, and right now that space feels wider than ever. For all fans, this is why we watch, not just for speed, but for human drama under the brightest lights. The real story was never about Montreal's lap time. In the end, the fastest car is not built in a wind tunnel. It is built in the conversation turning feeling into speed, and right now Red Bull is learning silence is not golden. It is the loudest warning of all.